All right, next in the process of making these rooms, I want to talk about making things slightly disheveled and askew, with the intention, again, of these rooms not feeling like perfect staged sets or sterile architectural renders, but more as environments that people live in. So I'm going to start here with this example of books, and this is almost exactly what I don't want to see. It's 6, 7 identical books, all lined up perfectly evenly on a boring shelf. There are no shelves in the world that look, well, there might be a couple, but very few, and none that anybody actually lives in. Even if you have all of the books the same size, they will at the very least be at slightly different positions. Maybe that this last book, if I move the pivot point down to the bottom here, whoops, do that. Maybe the last book is slightly tilted up against the shelf, things of that nature. So at the very least, they're not all going to be perfectly placed. But even more so is I would take your standard book model, and then I would duplicate it and make a different sized book. You've already got the geometry in place, so it shouldn't be terribly difficult to adjust the size. So we can just move the covers in a little bit. Actually, I'm in smooth view, so when we get out of smooth view, and I'm going to do this and that. Okay, there we go. Just make sure I have everything selected. So I'll move that in a little bit, and then I'll move this in a little bit, just making sure that I'm keeping things even. Okay, and now I have a skinnier book, and let's make it a little bit shorter as well, and not quite as deep. Okay, so now we've got a second book that took an extra 30 seconds to make. All right, and then you can do maybe I'll duplicate this again. And maybe this one will be even skinnier. So I'll do like that. That, and I have to push these in a little bit. Maybe the cover's not going to be quite as big on this one, so I'll select the outside edges and just scale them in. And then let's make this one just enormous. Okay. So now I have 3 different size books, and I can go and duplicate these. I'll smooth them out too, so they look a little bit better. Not that. Okay. We'll get them positioned, and maybe this one isn't actually all the way in there. Maybe there is a gap and it's leaning up, in which case this one's probably going to be leaning up a little bit too. All right, and then maybe you've got another book over here, and this one is actually fully rotated, so it's laying on its side. So that'll be, oops, nope, not that. I want to rotate around. Oh, X. There we go. All right, so then maybe this one is sitting down. And we've got another one above it. But again, not perfectly above it. It's off a little bit. You can rotate it a little bit. And maybe I'll even scale it just a little bit, so it's, again, adding some irregularity, adding a little bit of chaos, just to keep things interesting. So this is going to be a much more interesting way to dress a bookshelf, okay, than this is if you have all the same books. Okay, so think about this principle, and don't just apply it to literal books on a shelf, right? Anytime you've got a series of things, you can add some irregularity to it, add a little bit of chaos. So I'm going to save this real quick, because I may come back to it in the future. But if I go back to my room layout scene with everything in it, we can look at other ways that we can apply this concept. So the first way is actually with this fence. And when I modeled the fence, let me isolate this. The fence is actually constructed of just like 12 identical boards going all the way up. But I didn't want them to feel perfectly identical. So what I did is, after I duplicated them all, each board I moved just a little bit. And let me, oops. I'm going to select the post too, so you can see that as reference. So this post is constructed with that channel. There we go. There is a little bit of a gap in there between the board and, kind of see it better here, between the board and the metal post. And I use that to my advantage in how I spaced the boards. Some I moved forward, some I moved a little bit further back, some I actually rotated a little bit. And the effect you get is this slightly irregular pattern moving all the way up. So that now if I, let's see if we can get a good angle here. Actually, this will probably be a pretty good angle. You can really notice it when I hit render. And once Maya kind of resolves this, here's the render view as it carries on. Okay, so now it's rendering. I don't know why there's a hiccup, but it seems to be working now. So now you can see what that variation in the boards gives me. It gives me some interesting texture. You can tell even from a distance that there are individual boards there. It's not just a flat plane. Now you'll see some regularity the last 4 or 5 boards, because in the actual view that this is going to be rendered, which is going to be, this is going to be seen from no closer than this, but probably even further away. You're not really going to be able to see those individual boards too well. But what I did on the second set here is I took this section and I mirrored it across the, what axis is that? In the Z direction, so that on this section, this board is going to the left. On this section, that board is going to the right. And it just breaks it up, and you can't really tell that it's just a mirror. It just gives you some irregularity there. And so I could continue to do that further down, is just select this board and just actually scale it to -1. And now it flips that, and now we get a little bit more irregularity there. And you can kind of see how that renders. So that's applying the same principles with the books to the fence. But there are other things that you can do to add a little bit of chaos to your scenes. And I do say just a little bit. You don't need to blow it up. But, I've got these, let me turn off the render because we don't need to see that going. I've got these 3 kind of standing mats you'll see in workshops often. So I duplicated them, and then I moved one closer and I rotated them just a little bit so they're not all in a completely straight line. Right? Just adding that irregularity. The wheels on the bottom of this work table are all slightly different angles. You could even take the whole table itself and rotate it. Because right now it's rotated perfectly 90 degrees, which isn't necessarily perfect. So maybe that's slightly askewed. These stools are rotated so that, because if you just take a stool and duplicate it and move it over, it's kind of weird that the legs are pointing in the same direction. on top of the fact that they're, horizontally in a line, but rotate it a little bit so that the legs aren't in the exact same position. And then you can also move it in. Maybe this stool is actually not even on a mat. Maybe this stool is over here on the floor, in which case you'll also have to move it down to the floor. Okay. Looking over here at this cabinet, I actually modeled this cabinet with the intention that you could open the door. So if I move the pivot point over here, and actually before I do that, it'd probably be better just to combine them into one object. And then I will go to Modify Center Pivot. There we go. Move my pivot point over to the end. Okay, and now I can open. Let me go to wireframe here. Just want to make sure my pivot point's in the right spot. Nope, undo that. There we go. Okay, so maybe this is a cabinet that's been around a little while and the doors don't close all the way anymore. So now I can just leave that open a little bit, and now I've got all that extra depth added to my scene, and I can populate these shelves with, I don't know, paint cans, or maybe there's a rag hanging out of it, or there's a hose on the bottom shelf, kind of whatever. Or maybe I've got like a coat hanging up on the top corner there. Right, same thing with these cabinets, is that they're all kind of in a line, because when you install cabinets, you take great care to make sure that your cabinets are all in a line. But maybe they've been there a while, or it was an amateur job, and the cabinets aren't all perfectly in a line anymore. Or, oops, not that. Give me. Let's see if we can grab this. Oops, no. That, and then let's see if I can grab the bottom edge of this. There we go. All right, and actually I probably should just, again, combine these. Okay, maybe this drawer is out a little bit. Okay, so you can add that variation, and now this corner of the room feels that much more alive because it's not perfect. So keep that in mind. When I actually add pillows to the couch or a blanket, it's not going to be a perfectly folded blanket, and the pillows aren't going to be staged like you're walking through a model home. One of the pillows might be a little bit more pressed in because somebody was just sitting there. The other pillow might just be tossed just somewhere on the side, or maybe it's sat down on the floor next to it because somebody was sitting there and they didn't want the pillow. Right? Maybe there on the coffee table there's a mug and a coaster, but the mug isn't on the coaster. Or maybe one mug is on a coaster and the other one isn't. Right? You can have fun with these things. You could even add, if there is a mug not on a coaster, maybe you add a coffee ring to the texture of the coffee table to show that people aren't using coasters. Subtle little storytelling things, but you can really play around with that level of I keep calling it chaos, kind of a strong word, but
throw bra and underwear around too.
It's telling a different story, but yes, you could do that too. Absolutely, anything you can do to make it feel like a lived-in space. If you've got an older wood floor, maybe some of the boards are popping up, so you can do that, and that's there we go. That's a lovely little bit of texture right there that you can even spot from a ways away. All right. So think about these things as you're bringing your scene together and trying to figure out what you can add to help tell a story.